When the doorbell rang at the Collins home that night, Laura already had a knot in her stomach. Port Charles had been tense for days, a city humming with nervous energy beneath the quiet surface. The mayor could feel it every time she walked through the hospital corridors, every time she stood at a podium, every time she looked out over the waterfront and wondered how many deals had been made in the shadows without her knowledge. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the sight waiting on the other side of that door. Jens Sidwell. Calm, confident, carrying himself like a man who never knocked without a purpose. For Laura, it was not a surprise so much as a confirmation of something she had been dreading for weeks. The moment when all the rumors, all the whispered warnings about Sidwell's growing influence, finally came crashing into her living room. Her first reaction was not fear. It was fury. The brief flash of shock faded almost immediately, replaced by a cold, controlled anger that any longtime resident of Port Charles would recognize. Laura Collins had buried friends, lost loves, survived kidnappings, betrayals, coups, and mob wars. She had stood in front of grieving families and tried to defend impossible choices. So when she faced Sidwell on her doorstep, the disappointment in her eyes hit harder than any shouted insult. It wasn't simply that he had intruded on her home, on her one remaining sanctuary. It was that she understood instinctively that a man like Jens Sidwell never came empty-handed, and never without leverage. His presence alone meant one thing: he believed he owned something that mattered to her, and he was ready to use it. Sidwell had been a distant presence in Port Charles for months, a name that slipped through conversations like a cold draft under a locked door. He never needed to raise his voice or show his hand. His power lay in what he knew and how quietly he collected it. While Sonny Corinthos fought to hold onto his territory and Jason Morgan waited in the wings for the next mission, Sidwell was busy playing a different kind of game. He was not a man of fists and bullets, he was a man of files, recordings, and carefully chosen secrets. The docks could change hands, the mob landscape could shift, but as long as he controlled information, he controlled outcomes. That was the lesson Port Charles was only beginning to learn. The last election had seemed, at least on the surface, like a victory for democracy. Laura's campaign had been bruising but honest, focused on reforming the hospital's board, strengthening community programs, and pushing back against the quiet corruption that had seeped into city contracts and hospital budgets. Election night had been emotional, chaotic, and exhausting, but ultimately triumphant. To the public, it was a celebration. To certain powerful players watching from the shadows, it had been something else entirely, an opportunity. Now, as Sidwell crossed the threshold into her home, Laura couldn't ignore the nagging thought that the real consequences of that night were only just beginning to unfold. The general hospital community had already felt Sidwell's presence in subtle ways. Budget questions that didn't add up. Board members who suddenly grew hesitant. Whispers of investments and shell companies that somehow circled back to entities with ties to him. There had been rumors that he was funding certain projects, backing certain candidates, watching specific people with more interest than a benevolent benefactor ought to have. It wasn't just about money. It was about access to medical records, schedules, security footage, staffing changes. The kind of access that could ruin lives if placed in the wrong hands. And Jens Sidwell was precisely the kind of man who made wrong hands sound like a strategy rather than a threat. Laura's anger when she saw him was rooted in more than personal dislike. It came from an almost painful recognition: if he had chosen this moment to stand in front of her, it meant he believed he had the upper hand. The rumors about surveillance on election night, the suggestion that certain people had been watched, followed, perhaps even recorded, had seemed like paranoia at first. But the more she thought back on that chaotic evening, the hushed conversations in corners, the hurried phone calls, the strange sense of being observed even during private moments, the more those whispers took on a frightening clarity. Sitting in her office days after the election, she had brushed off the idea that someone might have been controlling the narrative from behind the scenes. Now, staring at Sidwell's composed expression, she could no longer dismiss that possibility. Sidwell didn't need to raise his voice to make demands. His power came from the implication that he had already anticipated every move Laura could make. If he had someone trailing her on election night, that someone might have captured more than just innocent images of a candidate celebrating. Maybe there were heated arguments never meant to be seen, private confessions from allies or rivals, desperate compromises made in dark corners when the numbers looked uncertain. Perhaps there were glimpses of Laura meeting with people whose names should never appear beside hers in the same frame. Even if nothing illegal had occurred, in politics, perception was often more powerful than truth. A carefully edited recording, released at the wrong time, could destroy a career, shatter public trust, and destabilize the fragile balance of power in Port Charles. That is where Sidwell's real leverage likely lay, not in what he could prove, but in what he could suggest. A grainy video, a partial audio clip, a snapshot taken from across a crowded room could be manipulated into a narrative that served his agenda. Laura knew this. She had seen how quickly half-truths and innuendo could spread through the city, infecting every conversation, poisoning every alliance. If Sidwell had indeed recorded election night, he wasn't just sitting on evidence. He was sitting on a weapon. The question wasn't whether he would use it, the question was when, and to what end. What would he ask of her? That was the unspoken tension crackling in the room as the door closed behind him. Sidwell was not a man who wasted time on petty threats. If he had come in person, it meant he needed Laura, for legitimacy, for access, or for the illusion of cooperation. He might demand that she look the other way on certain investigations, slow down a probe into financial irregularities at the hospital, or push for appointments that placed his allies in strategic positions. He might insist that she publicly support a controversial initiative that quietly benefited his interests. To the outside world, it would look like ordinary politics. But Laura would know that every word, every vote, every public appearance was being shadowed by the knowledge that her refusal could trigger the release of whatever he was hiding. The irony was cruel. As mayor, Laura had vowed to restore transparency and integrity to Port Charles. Yet the more she honored that commitment, the more dangerous she became to the people who profited from murky deals and hidden truths. Sidwell's visit signaled that he had decided to stop merely observing her efforts and start actively shaping them. It was the moment when all pretense fell away, when the quiet figure in the background stepped into the frame and said, in effect, "I decide how far your honesty will go." His power was not just in what he possessed, but in the timing of its revelation. A scandal released too early could be weathered. One unleashed at the right moment could topple everything. For viewers, the image of Laura, one of the moral anchors of Port Charles, standing face to face with Sidwell marks a terrifying turning point. This isn't just another villain swaggering into town with a gun or a vendetta. It is a calculated strategist who understands that in a world where everyone has something to lose, fear of exposure is the sharpest blade. The hospital, the mayor's office, and the city at large are all suddenly vulnerable in ways they don't even fully grasp yet. Sidwell doesn't need to control every piece on the board, he only needs to hold one crucial secret to force every other piece to move in the direction he chooses. And then there is the haunting uncertainty. What exactly did his people capture on election night? Was it a conversation between Laura and an ally that could be twisted to suggest corruption? Footage of a rival being quietly paid off to bow out of the race? A desperate promise made by someone close to her, who tried to help without understanding the full consequences? Or was the camera turned somewhere even more dangerous, toward General Hospital itself, where lives hung in the balance while politics played out across City Hall? The longer the question remains unanswered, the more it eats away at trust. Every character who was present that night must now wonder what Sidwell might have on them, what angle he could exploit, what fragment of their truth he might manipulate into a lie. Laura's anger, then, is more than righteous indignation. It's a shield against the creeping sense of helplessness that Sidwell's arrival brings. She knows what it feels like to be cornered by men who think they hold all the cards. She has clawed her way out of impossible situations before, not by sheer force, but by refusing to surrender her conscience. This time, the stakes may be higher than ever. If she capitulates, she risks becoming a figurehead, her administration quietly puppeteered by a man who thrives on secrets. If she resists, she may watch her reputation be shredded, her allies dragged through the mud, and the hospital plunged into political chaos. That impossible dilemma is exactly where Sidwell wants her, and exactly where the drama becomes irresistible for the audience. Because in a town like Port Charles, nothing stays hidden forever. The question is not just what Sidwell is hiding, but how far he is willing to go to protect it, and how much Laura is willing to risk to expose it. His visit to her door is not merely a plot twist, it is the opening move in a psychological war that will test the limits of her resolve and the true strength of her allies. For now, Sidwell's evidence, if it exists, remains locked away, a shadow hanging over every decision Laura makes. His presence is a reminder that the battle for General Hospital is no longer confined to boardroom votes and budget cuts. It has become a war of narratives, of images and recordings, of carefully timed leaks and strategic silences. And as the story advances, viewers are left with the chilling realization that the most dangerous weapon in Port Charles isn't a gun, a syringe, or a bomb. It's whatever Gen Sidwell captured on election night, and the cold, patient way he plans to use it.